Ryan Reynolds sold Aviation Gin for $610 million. He sold Mint Mobile for $1.35 billion. He was in the process of taking his ad tech company public in a deal that would have valued it at hundreds of millions more. And then, in the span of about 12 months, Paramount canceled 3 of his projects, Disney replaced his voice as Deadpool, and his IPO went completely silent. So what actually happened to Ryan Reynolds' money? Not his reputation, not the gossip, his actual balance sheet. Because when you look at the numbers, what you find is one of the most interesting case studies in modern business about what happens when a trust-based empire gets stress-tested by a lawsuit that has nothing to do with the business itself. Let's get into it. Before we can talk about damage, we need to understand what Ryan Reynolds actually built, because most people get this wrong. They think of him as a movie star who does funny commercials. That framing undersells the real picture by about $2 billion. Here's the model. Reynolds didn't just endorse Aviation Gin. He bought a stake in the company back in 2018 and made himself inseparable from the brand. He showed up in every ad. He made the content. He turned the product and his personality into one thing. And when Diageo came in and acquired the brand in 2020, the deal was worth up to $610 million. Reynolds walked away as one of the primary beneficiaries. He did the exact same thing with Mint Mobile. He bought in, built the marketing around himself, and sold to T-Mobile for $1.35 billion in 2023. Not a spokesperson. An owner, not royalties, equity. Then there's Maximum Effort, his marketing and production company. This is the piece most people don't talk about. Maximum Effort doesn't just make Ryan Reynolds ads. It makes ads for other companies. It's the engine that makes the whole model repeatable and scalable. And then there's MNTN, his advertising technology company in the connected TV space. This is the company that was heading toward an IPO, which would have been, by most estimates, the single largest conversion of Reynolds' business value into liquid, publicly traded wealth. Bigger than the gin, bigger than the phone company. Now stack all of that together, and at peak valuation, you're looking at a portfolio worth north of $2 billion in enterprise value, all tied directly to one thing, the Ryan Reynolds brand. Witty, warm, self-deprecating, universally likable. That's the collateral, not a product, not a patent, not real estate, a personality. And that is also the single point of failure buried inside the entire structure. Every one of those deals, Aviation, Mint Mobile, Maximum Effort, MNTN, was underwritten by the same asset. And if that asset takes a hit, every business in the portfolio reprices at the same time. So now let's talk about the hit. In December 2024, Blake Lively filed a legal complaint against Justin Baldoni, the director of It Ends With Us. She alleged sexual harassment and a coordinated smear campaign after she raised concerns during production. The filing included text messages, emails, and documentation of what she described as a PR operation designed to damage her reputation. That would have been significant on its own, but the complaint also named Ryan Reynolds. According to the filing, Reynolds had sent messages to Baldoni that were characterized as hostile and threatening. His team responded publicly, which itself was a break from the carefully maintained brand posture of staying above the noise and never getting drawn into public conflicts. Then, in January 2026, those text messages became public. The content wasn't criminal, but it was personal. And personnel is the one register where the Reynolds brand really cannot afford to operate in the negative. Baldoni responded with a $400 million countersuit against Lively, Reynolds, and others in their circle. He included a $161 million damage claim against Lively, specifically for lost career opportunities. Now, those numbers are legal posturing as much as financial reality. Countersuits at that scale are designed to create maximum disruption. But the disruption was real, even if the final settlement is eventually a fraction of the headline figure, because the real cost of this lawsuit isn't the legal fees. It's what happened to the projects, the partnerships, and the portfolio while the litigation was active. Visual note: Blake Brown Beauty product image. Let's start with Blake Lively's business because it gives you the clearest picture of how this kind of damage actually works in real time. Lively had launched Blake Brown Beauty, a hair care line. Pre-launch projections had the brand tracking toward roughly $100 million in first-year revenue. It had retail partnerships. It had distribution. It had all the audience reach that comes with being Blake Lively. By the end of 2025, actual revenue reportedly came in at around $15 million. That is an 85% collapse from projected value in under 12 months. The product didn't change, the distribution didn't fail. What changed was the reputational environment around the founder, and that was enough to kill the growth trajectory. This is the mechanism. The brand is the founder. When the founder's public perception shifts, the brand's revenue shifts with it. There is no firewall. Now apply that logic to Ryan Reynolds' portfolio. Aviation Gin is already sold. That money is safe. Mint Mobile is already sold. Same thing. The deals that already closed are insulated, but MNTN has not been sold. The IPO has not happened. Maximum Effort's client relationships are ongoing, and the future deal pipeline, the next Aviation Gin, the next Mint Mobile, requires a Reynolds brand that still commands premium trust. That's where the exposure lives. In December 2025, Paramount canceled 3 Ryan Reynolds projects that had been in various stages of development. This is the most concrete, directly measurable career damage in the entire story. Not sentiment surveys, not brand perception studies. Actual contracts actually canceled. Hollywood studios don't cancel projects because they disapprove of somebody's text messages. They cancel projects because they model the risk of releasing a film headlined by a brand-damaged lead against the projected box office, and the math stops working. Reynolds' films have historically outperformed partly because audiences associate the actor with a persona they like off-screen. Compromise that persona, and you compress the box office multiplier. 3 canceled projects represents tens of millions in lost fees, lost back-end participation, and a public signal to the rest of the industry about where Reynolds' commercial value stood in late 2025. But even that wasn't the most striking move. In June 2025, while the $400 million lawsuit was still active, Ryan Reynolds was replaced as the voice of Deadpool in a production context. Neil Patrick Harris took the role. Let that sit for a second. Deadpool is not just a character Reynolds played. It is arguably the most complete fusion of actor and intellectual property in contemporary Hollywood. The sarcasm, the fourth wall breaks, the self-aware humor. He didn't play Deadpool. He was Deadpool. Being replaced in that role, even temporarily, is Disney and Marvel calculating that maintaining an uninterrupted association with Reynolds created reputational exposure for one of their most valuable franchises. When a studio starts managing your brand as a liability rather than an asset, that's institutional distancing. And institutional distancing is the first domino that tips everything else. Visual note. Timeline graphic of events, lawsuit filed, text released, projects canceled, voice replaced, IPO paused. Things kept expanding from there. In January 2026, text messages between Blake Lively and Taylor Swift became part of the public litigation record. Swift was subpoenaed. Now, here's why that matters financially, and it has nothing to do with Swift's personal involvement. Taylor Swift's commercial brand is estimated at roughly $1.1 billion annually. Her public associations are managed with extraordinary precision. When Taylor Swift gets pulled into your lawsuit discovery documents, it sends a signal to every brand partner, every corporate relationship, every potential business partner in the Reynolds-Lively orbit that the blast radius of this litigation has expanded well beyond the original parties. Anna Wintour appeared in lawsuit documents. Matt Damon was named. These aren't peripheral figures. When those names appear in your litigation paperwork, you're no longer managing a personal dispute. You're managing an industry event, and every brand considering a Reynolds partnership in early 2026 had the same question. Is the upside from his name worth the ongoing exposure? Now let's look at the historical precedent, because this is not the first time a trust-based brand empire has faced this kind of stress test. Tiger Woods, before 2009, was pulling in an estimated $100 million a year in endorsements. Nike, Gatorade, AT&T, Accenture, Gillette. After his personal scandal broke, the endorsement exits were swift. Accenture dropped him within 2 weeks. Estimated annual endorsement income dropped to around $15 million within a year. That's an 85% compression, the exact same percentage as Blake Brown Beauty's revenue collapse. The mechanism is identical even across completely different industries. Kanye West's Adidas partnership was generating approximately $1.5 billion in annual revenue. When that relationship ended, the financial impact was in the billions. Lance Armstrong's net worth reportedly went from around $125 million down to about $50 million after the doping revelations. The pattern in every case is the same. The speed and severity of the damage is directly proportional to how completely the brand was built around a single personality trait. Reynolds' brand is built on trust, the feeling that he's exactly who he appears to be. The lawsuit doesn't allege fraud. It doesn't allege criminal conduct. But it introduces something corrosive into the brand story, the possibility that the persona is managed rather than authentic. That gap between the public image and the private reality is exactly where brand value compresses. And that brings us to the piece that's gotten the least coverage but might matter the most financially, the MNT IPO. An IPO requires a clean public narrative from its key principles. When institutional investors and underwriters evaluate a public offering, they're not just looking at business metrics. They're evaluating the risk profile of every major stakeholder. A stakeholder with an active $400 million countersuit, canceled studio projects, and ongoing public litigation creates a serious risk disclosure problem. You either disclose it in the S-1 filing and watch it compress your valuation, or you wait and risk the IPO window closing before the litigation resolves. As of early 2026, the MNTN IPO had gone quiet. No announced timeline, no public updates. A process that had been building momentum effectively paused. The Aviation gin money is in the bank. The Mint Mobile money is in the bank. But the NTN Wealth event is sitting in a waiting room with no confirmed appointment.